Hello guys, it's Jank Deck Brewer here, and today I'm bringing you the deck Fevered Ancient Lore. One of the key pieces of our deck is Sage of Ancient Lore, its flipped counterpart, and Fevered Visions. Together, our main goal of the deck is to have multiple copies of Fevered Visions out, get a lot of card draw for you and your opponent, flip Sage of Ancient Lore, and swing in for a bunch of damage with a creature that has both Vigilance and Trample on it. Alright, so in our deck, we're going to be running 4 Sage of Ancient Lore and 4 Fevered Visions. Having the multiple copies of Fevered Visions is really important as we want to have 2 or 3 of them on the board to generate that card draw. And having multiple copies of Fevered Visions usually does quite a bit of damage to your opponent over the course of the game. And we want to have 4 Sage of Ancient Lore as our main win con in the deck, and so we don't want to miss out on that. The next key part of our deck is Control, so we're going to be running 4 Censor and 4 Essence Scatter. We really need this control for early in the game, not so much later in the game, but early in the game we can easily be crushed because our deck plays rather slow and our win cons are later in the game, so we need to hold back the opponent as much as we can until we can drop our important cards. And Censor is very good main deck as we can just cycle it for 1 blue mana and find possibly another copy of Fevered Visions or Sage of Ancient Lore. And Essence Scatter is really good as we can easily be crushed early in the game by creatures, but if the opponent is not running a creature heavy deck, we can just sideboard it out for Negate. So the next part of our deck, and arguably the most important part, is card advantage. So we're going to be running 4 Glimmer of Genius, 4 Anticipate, 2 Pull from Tomorrow, and 2 Sin Prodder. The 4 Glimmer of Genius is really good as being able to scry 2 and then draw 2 cards is really good in this deck, as the scry 2 is good so we can search through our deck and find our key pieces, and drawing 2 is especially good in this deck as we just want as much card draw as we can get. And having 4 Anticipate is really good for us searching for the cards that we need, especially multiple copies of Fevered Visions. Having the 2 of Pull from Tomorrow is good enough. I didn't want to bring it up to 3 or 4 as drawing it early game is really bad and having it late game is really good. So I feel like 2 is good enough, but being able to play Pull from Tomorrow late in the game, drawing 3, 4, 5 cards is really good as it helps boost our deck greatly and boosts our Sage of Ancient Lore. Having the 2 of Sin Prodder is a really weird addition, but I feel like it fits very well in the deck and what we want to do. And having a 3/2 body attached to card advantage is really good as we can just swing in for damage earlier than we would with Sage of Ancient Lore, and also having card advantage on top of it, being able to draw an extra card or just dealing damage to the enemy's face is really good. The next part of our deck is miscellaneous cards that are just as important, and so we're going to be running 3 Channeler Initiate, 3 Waxing Moon, and 1 Nissa Steward of Elements. 3 Channeler Initiate is really important as being able to tap early game for more mana is really good to help get that Sage of Ancient Lore out as soon as we can, and being able to have that turn into a 3/4 body later in the game is good to block the enemy's creatures and possibly swing in for more damage. And usually the enemy does not see Waxing Moon coming, so we can easily flip our Sage of Ancient Lore and swing in for a bunch of damage out of nowhere. And having the 1 of Nissa Steward of Elements I feel was a good addition to the deck because she does some things that we actually want to do, and plus she has an alternate win condition for us as well. Her +2 is really good as we want to be able to search for key pieces in our deck. Her 0 is good for helping us ramp, and her -6 is a good alternate win condition, but at the same time you don't want to be drawing her too much, so I only put 1 of her in this deck. Alright, so these are the lands that we're going to be running: 8 islands, 5 forests, 3 mountains, 4 Botanical Sanctums, 3 Spirebluff Canal, and 2 Game Trail. Fairly simple, I don't really need to talk about it. The last part of this deck is the sideboard, and so we're running 2 Force, 2 Manglehorn, 4 Negate, 2 Hermit of Natterknolls, 3 Magma Spray, and 2 Sweltering Suns. Force and Manglehorn are good against the matchups against Artifact, the Dynaful Tower matchup, Mardu Vehicles, and Aetherflux Reservoir, and Aetherworks Marvel. All those cards are still seeing play, and Manglehorn and Force are really good counters to those decks. Negate is especially good against Planeswalkers, and if the opponent is not running a creature heavy deck, we can just take out Essence Scatter and replace it with Negate. Hermit of the Natterknolls is good against control, and it's just pure card draw if we can resolve it against control, as if they play a spell during our turn we can draw a card, and if it's flipped we can draw 2 cards, which is really good for our deck. Having Magma Spray and Sweltering Suns is good against the aggro decks and being able to stop them early game to help us get an advantage when we drop our huge creature Sage of the Ancient Lore later in the game. And the Sweltering Suns can easily take out those small creatures that are low to the ground, and Magma Spray can just kill the creatures one by one, but still effectively do it. So the total price of the deck is $97, the price of the non-lands is $44, price of the lands is $47, and price of the sideboard is $6. The lands make up the majority of the deck, so if you can't afford that, then you just have a $44 deck, which isn't that bad, and you can just play basic lands instead. Our lands are very important, as we want to have as much on-curve plays as we can, even though there isn't a lot of curve in this deck, but we don't want to be left behind, as this deck is already fairly slow. But if you can't afford it, playing basics shouldn't be that bad, as like I said, our deck is slower paced, so a lot of our very important cards are later in the game, and by that time you should have all the mana that you need without the non-basic lands. Alright, so that's Fevered Ancient Lore, and I hope you guys enjoyed this deck tech, and just remember that this deck isn't meant to be competitive. It isn't going to win you any tournament most likely. I don't know if it's going to win you FNM, but it is easily probably the most fun I've had playing a deck in Standard in a long while, as it is just really wacky and involves a cool combo that a lot of people haven't tried, or at least I've never really seen it, and it's usually very fun for the opponent to play against too, as they're very surprised at just getting attacked by a huge flip Sage of Ancient Lore, and it's rather funny actually. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video.